Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy, one-stop destination for civil services aspirants. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, look at the details and the articles which are relevant for gaining perspective, and also direct questions when it comes to examination, both for the prelims as well as the mains. So today we are going to discuss a variety of different topics, and along with that we are also going to gain an approach regarding answer writing, which is very important if you want to succeed in the mains examination. Now you can download the PDF, the annotations of the PDF from the Telegram link and the channel which is given here. So today we are going to discuss in total around 8 different topics from various different parts of general studies syllabus. So we will take a look at these topics, some in greater detail because they are more relevant and more analytical in nature, some of them straightforward, relevant for the prelims itself. So, for example, the first, a strategy fueled by vision, powered by energy. Now, this is about the aspect of energy security and forms a part of the questions sometimes in GS paper 1, but sometimes also in GS paper 3. So, this has appeared in the editorial section written by Hardeep Puri. So, this is relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, India Australia defense ties beyond American shadows. Now, this is about the defense ties which should grow between India and Australia. Now, this is about geostrategy, IR as well, so part of GS paper 2 and some part of GS paper 3 as well, but mostly associated with 2. A ban, a split verdict, and a health concern. This is about the mustard, so portion of science and tech, GS paper 3. Now, few of the articles in slightly lesser details. No contempt if parliament or legislature makes laws. This is an observation which has been made by the Supreme Court, that when is it that a contempt proceeding can be triggered or not. So with the help of this article, we shall be taking a look at what is the contempt proceeding about, right? And which is the law regarding that, and what can be the overall approach. Is there any constitutional provision which backs that? So this is relevant for your GS paper 2. Then, motion of impeachment against Justice Verma to be initiated in the forthcoming monsoon session of the Parliament. This is something which has been informed by the Parliamentary Affairs Minister. So, basically, what is that impeachment proceeding when it comes to removal of a judge? So, again, GS paper 2. But more relevant nowadays, based upon the pattern, you will find that fourth and fifth can be very relevant for your prelims preparation as well. Not necessarily the mains examination, but the conditionalities associated, those kind of questions are being asked in the prelims. Then, sulfur cleaning device in coal plants not necessary. So, what is flue gas desulfurization? And what are the new norms which have been issued? So, this is again relevant for your GS paper 3. Bacteria found at Rajgir Hot Spring Lake shows antimicrobial ability, relevant for your prelims, and for the first time in 100 years, rare orchid seen in. So basically, roughly around 3 to 4 are important for your mains, and rest of them you can focus for your prelims preparation. Now, in case you want to get a foundational clarity regarding the concepts of the various different GS subjects in detail with your favorite educators and the top educators, in fact, across the country, that is where we have come up with a very lucrative offer of the GS plus complete CSAT coverage, along with the test series being offered at 19,999 with a 12-month free extension that shall be available to you. Do use the code IES English to avail further discounts. Now, having said that, we come to the first article of the day. The article, A Strategy Fueled by Vision, Powered by Energy. This is written by the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas. So, this article overall, yesterday we talked about how to break down the article so that it is easy to consume. So, this article, if you break it down, the first part, the preview part, talks about the context regarding the requirement and the importance of energy security. That is where, after that, it talks about the strategy followed by India. Then the strategy in the green sector, renewable energy, and reduced emission, and what is the consumer outlook or a way forward of sorts. So, this is basically the breakdown of the larger article. Now, what does the article tell you about? Now, the article, the context, the aspect of the article is very simple. That look, when it comes to India in general, we are an energy starved nation. We don't have adequate amount of fossil fuel reserves. We don't have adequate amount of resources in many of the cases. So we are dependent on imports. So the growth of our economy, the developmental path that our economy takes, that is based upon our imports. Because think about it, be it logistics, be it power, be it, let's suppose, the vehicular movement, everything is driven by the fossil fuels, which we don't have, be it oil, be it gas, anything like that. So that is where our demand for these fossil fuels have been increasing. So this article will highlight what are the strategic steps that India has taken in order to meet that growing demand. But before that, a context. India is the third largest energy and oil consumer across the world, fourth largest refiner, and the fourth largest LNG importer globally. Okay. Energy demand is expected to grow 2.5 times by 2047, and 30%, or rather 25% of the incremental energy demand across the globe is coming from country of India. So here, basically, the article talks about the fact that India faces what is known as the energy trilemma. What is a trilemma? Dilemma is when you have to choose between two. Trilemma is when you have three various different priorities. So, for energy security, the trilemma is affordability. First of all, the fuel should be available to you at a very cheap price. Availability, reliable availability, that uninterrupted supply should be there. Uninterrupted supply at a cheaper rate, which is sustainable fuel as well. So that is basically the energy requirement that we have. This can be considered to be the prerequisite for any energy security to be gained. Prerequisite, okay, for energy security. Now, here, India has basically followed a four-pronged approach. Now, what are the four-pronged approach? First of all, diversification of sources and suppliers when it comes to fuel. And over the past year and a half, you would have seen that there are various different areas from which we are sourcing fuel. If you think about it, let's suppose a decade and a half or a couple of decades back, our chief suppliers were restricted to the region around Middle East, that is, be it Iran, be it the region of Iraq, Saudi, and then one far off country being that of Venezuela, and some amount of oil being taken from Russia. But now, ever since the sanctions have hit Iran for a decade and more, our energy basket has actually expanded in terms of the import. We are getting some amount of energy from US as well. We are getting some amount of energy from Russia as well. So there are various different diversification of source. Now, what does that ensure? That ensures availability, right? Reliable supply. At the same time, ensures that the cheapest product is available to you. This is one of the reasons why India has continued with the buying of the Russian oil, right? Because that is very affordable as of now. Expansion of domestic production. Now, when I say we are energy starved, we don't have enough amount of energy resources, that is oil and natural gas, but we still have some amount which we can explore. Now, our previous exploration policies which were there, now they were a direct replication of what can be referred to as a license Raj system, where the government will allocate certain blocks. Those blocks will be held up for auction. Now, many of the times, the interested parties would never participate in the auction because you never know whether there will be oil within those blocks or not, and how much oil would be present. There would be large inaccuracies in terms of the data. So that is where there has been new policy which has come up, due to which there has been an expansion in terms of where we are exploring the oil. The policies we are going to talk about very shortly. But before that, a very key basic concept. Where do we find oil and natural gas in general across the planet? in which area do you find the presence of oil and natural gas? Think about it. For example, in the case of coal, we do know that in those areas where there has been a fossilization of the trees, particularly the tropical trees, and thereafter carbonization has happened or carbonification has happened, that is where the trees get converted into coal. But what about petroleum or crude oil and natural gas? So, crude oil and natural gas, they are typically found in the sedimentary basins where you have had decomposition and fossilization of marine plants and animals, marine animals in greater proportion. So, whichever regions you will have a geological history of some amount of marine sedimentation, chances of oil and natural gas to be found in that area is high. What does that mean? That means, as an individual, if you know the geological history of a particular region, you can also foretell where oil will be found. In India, which are the regions which have a marine sedimentary past? That is, there was shallow sea in the past in those regions. Rajasthan, particularly the Shekhawati region around Bikaner. So there again, you have the presence of oil and gas. Around the region of Brahmaputra Basin, there again, you have the presence of oil and gas. Around the region of Ankleshwar in Gujarat, there again. Now, Ankleshwar in Gujarat, there have been frequent ingress and outgress or regress of the sea. After all, that is how the run of Kutch has been created. So there have been frequent ingresses and regresses by the sea. There again, oil and natural gas are to be found. Eastern coast of India, particularly the Krishna Godavari basin. There again, that is an emergent coastline which has emerged above the water over the past multiple millennia. So, there again, you will find the presence of oil and gas. So, this basic idea about marine sedimentation and marine deposit will give you an idea about which regions you will be able to find the presence of oil and gas. Also, in the region of Andaman Nicobar, there again, oil and natural gas have been found, along with the Utkal coast, the region of the western coast, and so on. Many of the continental shelves across the world, they also obviously will have the marine deposits. So in the oceans, the regions of the continental shelves, they also become an abundant supplier of oil and natural gas. So you don't need to learn this, you don't need to rectify the places where oil deposits and natural gas deposits are to be found. Just understand the geological origin and you will be able to understand and predict them on your own. So, expansion of domestic production by various different policy initiatives, transition to renewables, for example, biogas, for example, when we talk about the green fuel, green hydrogen, ethanol blending program that has made some availability of fuel as well, and affordability by introducing a large pipeline grid, ensuring that everybody gets a reliable supply and the transportation costs are reduced because in pipeline you don't need to incur that transportation cost. The overall affordability has been ensured also with the help of a kind of a subsidy which has been done and subsidized, for example, LPG supply at a subsidized rate to the poor families. That again increases the affordability of energy. So energy affordability, availability, and sustainability, that is something which has to be ensured. Now here, let us understand some of the measures which has been taken by the government as per the article in order to ensure that this energy security prevails. Now, there have been various measures both upstream and downstream. Now, for the uninitiated, what do we mean by upstream measures and downstream measures? Upstream basically refers to those areas from where you explore and extract oil, right? So, this is a kind of a reform done in the exploration and production side. So, that is upstream, right? Downstream is when you take certain reform measures in distribution and marketing and selling of that oil. So, ENP or exploration and production, upstream. Pipeline gas supply, that is downstream. So there have been reform measures both in upstream as well as downstream. But when we talk about upstream measures, one of the important measure is increase in the acreage from where we are exploiting or exploring oil. Increase in acreage means what? Increase in acreage refers to the region from where you are extracting oil, that region has expanded by almost earlier from 8% to 16%. So exploration has almost doubled. The exploration area has doubled. Chances of finding oil also increases. Reduction of no-go areas by 99%. The areas which are designated that there you cannot explore or even survey for oil. So earlier those were very large chunks of land where no exploration could be carried out. Now that has been removed. Streamlining the licensing through open acreage licensing policy. What is that? We'll take a look. Sharing of infrastructure amongst exploration and producing players. So understand this. Earlier, what used to be the case, only then will you be able to understand the reform. Earlier, what used to be the case is that the government would put up certain auction blocks, right? Or certain blocks up for auction based upon its own geological study that, okay, we know that there is oil there. Now, this is a block we are putting up for auction. You bid for that. Now, the companies would spend a lot of money in order to bid for that. This would pave way for a lot of corruption as well. You had the very infamous case of the Reliance Petrochemical corruption case with the KG Basin, right? So the companies would bid for that, gain that block. But then the revenue or the earning that they would generate would only be after a set amount of production. So that was not incentivizing for the companies at all. Also, oil exploration is not something where you simply go with a shovel and an axe in hand and you pick out oil in barrels. No, you need complex machineries, you need complex monitoring system for which the machineries, the equipments which are used, they are very costly and high-end machineries. So these companies would end up buying, borrowing, leasing these machines, and thereby those machines would be trapped in those auction blocks for long period of time unless and until clearances were provided, unless and until the production process could start, which was again a loss-making endeavor. Because of these particular factors, none of the private players became interested or were interested in exploring and exploiting and producing oil from our particular region anymore. So that is when you had the new exploration policy which was devised. Under this, now the organizations were given a kind of a new revenue sharing model. They were also allowed to share the machineries amongst themselves. So that made it much more economical and cost saving for the organizations. It also happened that now the organizations could end up finding the areas where oil is to be found, and they could designate that as a block, and they could ask the government that, okay, now you put it up for auction, right? So this is where significant flexibility was provided in the mechanism of oil exploration and production. Now, one of the important part is the open acreage licensing policy, which came into force ever since 2017, 2018 is when it started functioning properly. Now, open acreage licensing policy is a part of the larger hydrocarbon exploration and licensing policy that India devised to increase the oil exploration and oil extraction. This followed the new exploration and licensing policy. That was the previous one. The newer one is the hydrocarbon exploration and licensing policy. Under this, you basically have the OALP along with the National Data Repository, which were launched in June 2017 as the key drivers to accelerate exploration and production activity in India. Now, under the OALP, companies are allowed to carve out areas they want to explore and oil and gas in, right? So I want to explore oil in this region. So make this as a separate block altogether, right? Companies can put in expression of interest or EOI as it is referred to for any area throughout the year. But such interests can be taken up thrice a year, right? Accumulated thrice in a year. The areas sought are then put on auction. So I have found an area, I have expressed interest in that area, and then the government will set up for auction. So that is the case of OALP. Now, here, the government has also focused on data. That is, unless and until you have enough repository of data where oil is to be found, in which area, how much amount of oil is there, till that point of time, your entire exploration and production will be an inefficient mechanism. So focus on data was significant. And that is where you also had the launch of Mission Anveshan. Now, Mission Anveshan, which was launched from the budgetary year 2025, talks about gathering 3D models, right? Map models of the seismic regions, not the seismic regions, but basically a seismic analysis. A seismic analysis is where the waves they travel through the structure of the surface and they end up finding anomalies in structure where you can have gas, where you can have liquid which is stored. So that is Mission Anveshan, where you have a greater seismometric study and creation of the map and data accumulation in order to generate a detailed data repository of where how much oil is to be found. So this is the purpose of this is exploration. Purpose is greater exploration of minerals, particularly energy minerals. Okay. Now you also have airborne gravity gradiometry surveys and continental shelf mapping which has been done. Now this has indicated the presence of newer reserves in certain areas across the west coast as well as across the Utkal coast as well. So there has been a greater stress paid upon how to get more data, reliable data. Now, a data center has also been created at the University of Houston, where international partners can actually look at the data, sieve through this data, and then, if they are interested, they can partner with an Indian company and they can get into exploration. So, this has basically opened up the oil sector and this has increased the amount of oil potential that we have. What we knew earlier as compared to that, what we know now, our overall oil region and the amount of oil deposits has slightly increased, oil and gas. Now, there have been new discoveries, not in one or two areas, in multiple different regions. Even remember the region of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Again, Andaman Nicobar Islands, eco-sensitive zone. It is not that today it has been found, from tomorrow oil exploration and extraction will start taking place. There has to be a serious thought process going into this, that this can mean devastation into the marine critical biodiversity that you find in the region of Andaman Nicobar Islands. But nonetheless, it is always good to know for a particular country's strategic thinkers that we have resources, fossil fuel resources in that area. So basically, the newer discoveries in which area have they been done? So this has been done by ONGC and Oil India Limited, oil, right? So Mumbai, offshore, Cambay, Mahanadi, and Assam basins, there have been newer discoveries. Now, recently, you had the Suryamani and the Vajramani wells on the western coast, right? In the, again, continental shelf region. And Utkal and Konark fields in the eastern coast, that is across the Odisha coastline. Now, as I told you, here again apply simple geographical logic. Rather than simply learning this, eastern coast has emerged from underneath the sea over the past millions of years. So there would be marine sedimentation which would have happened. Obviously, oil would be found. Western coast has been submerged again for millions of years. So offshore oil fields would definitely be found. Right? Now, when it comes to the upstream exploration, these were the measures. At the same time, simultaneously, there has been a lot of work going on in order to improve the green strategy, that is, the kind of alternate fuel, for example, ethanol blending. Now, ethanol blending is where you mix the fuel mixture or you get the fuel mixture having some amount of ethanol. Now, this ethanol can be produced from sugarcane, can be produced from molasses, bagasse that you extract from sugarcane, or can even be produced from, let's suppose, maize, corn, etc. Now, that ethanol, the proportion of that in the fuel mixture has gone up close to around 19.5% by 2025, which is very close to the target which was set by the government. So that has saved a lot of import bill, right? So this has basically attained 19.5% by 2025. That is 19.5% of your fuel will be ethanol. And that ethanol blending from the sources. Which are the sources? You have sugarcane, byproducts, then you also have maize, corn, and other feedstock as well. Now, what it has done, it has also improved the income of farmers in certain regions. Sugarcane farmers, in particular, they are the ones who suffer from pending arrears. The sugar mills are unable to pay them arrears. Now, if they are able to utilize the byproduct of sugarcane to produce ethanol, which can be used as a fuel mixture, obviously their income level tends to increase. Now, this has saved the foreign exchange reserves because we are importing fuel. Ethanol blending means lesser import of fuel. At the same time, you had the Satat initiative. Now, Satat initiative is what? Sustainable alternative towards affordable transportation. Now that alternative talks about CBG, compressed biogas. Overall, a network of these CBG plants have started coming up in various parts of the country. Now, obviously, once you have enough number, that is when you can have a complete network which is established and a reliable supply of CBG which can also be established. Green hydrogen is also being stressed upon. You have the various projects being awarded to the contractors like L&T for greater manufacture of green hydrogen, something to the tune of 10 lakh 10 kilotons, 10 lakh kilotons in fact. So that is where you have a greater scope for green hydrogen production and green fuel and green alternative as well. So this is the overall strategy. Now, in order to look at the reform at the downstream, that is at the portion of the market or the supply portion. So their pipeline and greater networking of the pipeline, a comprehensive network of pipeline has been laid out. Now this has reduced the transportation cost and made the fuel much more affordable. Even when it comes to gas, now the CNG. Now earlier you would still find that in many of the CNG pumps across the country, long lines are something which is synonymous with CNGs. But the article argues that you have large number of pipelines which have been laid out to ensure continued supply of CNG into these fuel pumps to ensure reliability. Okay, so overall, what have we discussed in this entirety of the article? The requirement of energy security for development is where we started. The context regarding India's position for oil and gas, then the energy trilemma, the four pronged approach followed by India. Then, after that, the upstream measures and the reforms. What is open acreage license policy? What is the HELP program? Then, after that, what are the newer discoveries which are done? Data repositories, how they are maintained. Then, we have basically discussed the downstream reforms. At the same time, what are the green, right? So this is basically required for your understanding. This is very important question for this year mains examination as well, but some of the portions can be relevant for next year prelims, like open acreage licensing policy and its norm. Now, energy security is a developmental security. This is a statement from the article itself. In light of the above statement, elucidate the measures taken by India to attain energy security. Now, how do you approach this? And what is it that you talk about when it is written elucidate? I hope most of us would have seen yesterday's session on YouTube regarding the answer writing. What is the meaning of elucidate, elaborate, difference between a discuss and a describe, difference between a comment and a justify, difference between a critically analyze and analyze. I hope we have taken a look at that. So with that set amount of information, now take a look at how do you solve this. So, energy security is a developmental security. If you write the intro, and by the way, elucidate means what? If elucidate is there in the question, means you have to put that in a lucid manner, in a very simplified version. Lucid manner, that is something where you break it down in order to help it easier to digest or easier to consume. That is elucidate. So, elucidate is simplified explanation. Simplified. Okay. Now, energy security is a developmental security. So your intro has to target this keyword that we talked about yesterday as well. So in the intro, you target the importance of energy security or what is energy security, any of those cases. Ideally advisable to target what is energy security. So energy security is what? It is the availability of energy at affordable price in a sustainable manner. Now that becomes a prerequisite for a nation's survival and the nation's growth. Limit your introduction there itself. Don't exceed the 25 to 30 word limit of the introduction. Then, when you move into the body, that is when you start talking about that India is an energy starved nation having limited amount of production of energy and we are dependent largely on imports. And why do you need to do that? Because you need to provide a kind of a background or a context after which the measures taken by India to attain energy security will make sense. Otherwise, if you simply talk about energy security and you start talking about the measures, it will appear to be an abrupt answer. You will not get even 2 to 3 marks in that answer. So first talk about energy security, importance of energy security for development, any kind of development, be it infrastructure, be it social, be it welfare. For everything, you need amount of energy. Clean cooking fuel, clean transportation, everything. Human development and healthcare is at risk. You can highlight that. Then talk about the energy starved country that India is. We are dependent on imports. There are measures. Then you go into the measures, talk about the measures, highlight the policies as well. The government programs like Mission Anveshan, OALP, Satat, these need to be highlighted. Okay, they should not be lost in the din of a larger descriptive paragraph that nobody is going to read ever again. So use the point subparagraph manner and underline these particular programs. Talk about them in a sentence and complete your answer. In the conclusion, again, you will reinforce the fact of the requirement of energy security for not only a kind of a sustained sovereignty, but at the same time, the rights and the development of each and every human. Okay, with that frame the answer. Try to write the answer on your own and create and get it evaluated if possible. Okay. Ethanol blending. Ethanol blending is basically about mixing the, for example, let's suppose you go to fill the fuel in your car or your vehicle or your scooter. Now, they have petrol that they put in. Now, in that petrol, 20% is ethanol. That is ethanol blend. Okay. Now, then coming to the second article. India Australia defense ties beyond American shadows. This is relevant for your GS paper too. Now, this article talks about the fact that when we talk about the present geopolitical scenario in the region of Indian Ocean, India and Australia, they can end up being a net security provider. The article talks about the fact that already the collaboration between India and Australia is increasing, but at the same time, they have the overlooming shadow of China's diplomatic outreach, diplomatic and military outreach. Which means what? When it comes to particularly the smaller island nations like the Maldives, when it comes to various other smaller island nations, that is when Chinese policy has been particularly aggressive and overwhelming in many of the cases. You would have followed the news story a few days back, 3 to 4 days back, where Australia decided to gift the Maldivians with a kind of a patrol boat, right? This is to put the Chinese away or try to tell them that you have other alternatives other than Chinese as well. But Chinese shadow looms very large in the region of Indian Ocean area and the Indian Ocean region, which makes many of the countries insecure. And at the same time, many of the countries are forced into a slight amount of subjugation, if that is a word which can be used in international diplomacy. Now, in light of that, US had always been seen as one of the guardians of the region of Indo-Pacific. But then, US has been withdrawing from international scenario. In fact, if you take a look at the global news on a day-to-day basis, it appears that you are not dealing with US anymore, you are actually dealing with a shopkeeper. right? A global shopkeeper who is all that the shopkeeper is interested in, that at what rate someone will give me goods. If someone gives me goods at a cheaper rate or buys my goods at a cheaper rate, I will provide all my diplomatic heft behind them. So US, as and when it has converted itself from the lone superpower of the world to a kind of a global shopkeeper, there's a withdrawal and retreat at the same time, rising security concerns in the region of, or in the area of the Indian Ocean region. The article also talks about the fact that because of this sudden withdrawal of US from the global policy making, various countries have to decide their priorities. When it comes to Australia, Australia has been dependent on US and the Western allies for a long period of time. Even the AUKUS program that Australia has, under which it is going to build some of the nuclear submarines for protection of the Indo-Pacific, even that is at risk owing to the US withdrawal. The article also goes ahead to argue that India's position is also precarious because India, being a strategically maritime nation having 7,000 kilometer plus of coastal area, India is still trapped in that China, Pakistan, India triangle. Right? There is a kind of a poking which is done by Pakistan every now and then, and that is where India tends to suffer from. So India also has to recalibrate its strategy when it comes to Indian Ocean region, and so has Australia. So that is where it is ideal for these two countries to come together, enhance their defense ties, and thereby become a net security provider for not only providing defense against the Chinese incursion or aggression, but at the same time providing a kind of HADR, that is humanitarian and disaster relief operations, because Indian Ocean region is also very prone to frequent cyclones, right? Frequent various different types of floodings, etc., which tend to happen, and that impacts the countries and the citizens of the Indian Ocean region. So they can go for humanitarian assistance and other aid purposes. Well, but then the ties between India and Australia, that is developing, and that has developed into a kind of a bureaucratic relationship. What do we mean by a bureaucratic relationship? When you have relationship between two countries, now initially that relationship, let's suppose in certain cases, can only be restricted to the heads of state, isn't it? One head of a state has visited other country, bolstered the relationship. It can develop into ministerial meets. But when you have the building or the transformation into a bureaucratic relationship, that is, the bureaucrats on both sides at various different levels, commerce ministry, defense ministry, finance ministry, they are in touch with each other, right? So at that point of time, regardless of whosoever is the head of state, the relationship remains strong. That is the case with India US relationship as well. Bureaucratization has happened. So, regardless of whether it is Trump, whether it is Joe Biden, or whether it is any random individual who becomes the US president, or anyone who becomes the prime minister of India, India US policy and relationship will continue to go strong, because we have seen even during the previous tenure of Dr. Manmohan Singh and then the present tenure of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the trajectory of Indo-US relationship has been on the uptick. Same is the case with India-Australia relationship also. We already are a partner. India and Australia are already a partner in Quad. So there is a kind of a strategic similarity and convergence. But when it comes to defense relationship, there have been certain progress and developments which have been made. What are those? Comprehensive strategic partnership was aligned in 2020. Other than that, 2 plus 2 ministerial dialogue launched in 2021 for greater high level interaction. Then mutual logistics support agreement, right? So whereby they can have a logistical support to each other. Now this is something where India has been having this kind of an agreement with US as well, right? Developing this kind of an agreement with France as well, UK as well. So the logistical support allows your naval force or your armed forces to function very far away from the mainland. So that is where this treaty is also important. Then in November 2024, there was a kind of a very significant milestone where air to air refueling was done by the Australian tankers, the air tankers, and that allowed the Indian aircrafts to reach Australia non-stop, extend their range. Now that provides a strategic flexibility because aircrafts have a limited range, limited fuel. Now, if another country's refueler can help your aircraft extend its range, that increases your operational awareness and area much beyond the limitations that you have. So that was when Indian Air Force was going to Australia, Northern Australia, in order to participate in the pitch black exercise. So we have been carrying out these military exercises as well. You have the Ostra-Hind, which is the exercise between the armies. Then you have the Os-Index, which is the exercise between the Navy. At the same time, India and Australia, they participate in Pitch Black. Pitch Black is a multinational air exercise for tactical kind of supremacy during nighttime flying, which is done in northern part of Australia, particularly across the RSAF or the Royal Australian Air Force's base at Darwin. In that area, the pitch black exercise have been held, where year after year, India has made its mark. The Indian Air Force pilots have made their mark owing to their tactical brilliance and flexibility. But India and Australia are also part of the Malabar exercise, where US also comes in. Malabar exercise is also getting bigger and bigger by the day. So there are various defense cooperations which are happening. But there are certain areas where still a lot of things need to be done. What are those? So breaking down the service barriers. That cooperation should not happen only between Navy and Navy, Army and Army, or Air Force and Air Force. Because nowadays, in the modern theater or in the modern war scenario, it won't be the case that army of one country will wait for the army of other country and then they will start fighting with each other. The air force of one country will only fire at the air force of another country, and the navy will fight separately. And at the end, we will decide who wins. No, you have a combined theater, right? Where air forces, armies, and navies, they operate in the same strategic sphere. So army to navy cooperation, air force to army cooperation, that is the requirement of the time. So that is something which also has to be implemented in terms of the defense partnership. Upgrading the defense advisor position, which is there, to 1-star rank, and diversification of that 1-star beyond the naval officer. Air Force and Army officers also need to be deputed in Canberra in order to have a kind of a defense attache that you have. In almost all the embassies that you have a kind of a defense attache. So the article argues that increase the prominence of that position and don't only bring the naval staff as your defense advisor in Canberra. It should be Army and the Air Force staff as well. Operational exchanges through fellowship of staff college graduates, wargaming exchanges, in order to improvise and operationalize the modern tactics and not restrict yourself to a kind of an ideological dialogue which is held in high position people, right? Oftentimes when you have these kind of exchanges between the countries, you have people at higher position, they talk to each other. It is mostly theoretical which is there. Nothing concrete comes out on the ground. That is where the article argues that people who have had combat experiences, people who are actually deployed on the ground, let them come up with the ideas of war gaming, let them come up with the ideas of combined military exercise rather than simply doing that for futility. Then cooperation in maintenance, repair, and the entire process. Maintenance and repair, that is again where US has reposed a lot of faith in India, UK has reposed a lot of faith in India. So this allows again for your naval vessels in order to have a larger strategic reach. So for this, there needs to be an agreement, right? Cooperation amongst defense MSMEs in both the countries, that can help in development of cutting edge technologies and further greater utilization in terms of modern military warfare. So that is the case of the to-do list. What needs to be done in order to bolster the defense? So what is the condition? What are the areas of cooperation? What is the to-do? So the practice question. Discuss the role of Indo-Australian Defense Partnership in securing the Indian Ocean region. Also suggest measures which can further the relationship between the two countries. Now, again, here it is discuss, not describe. Discuss means What had we discussed yesterday? Discuss basically means a greater depth and at the same time analyzing both the sides, the argument, right? Not to such an extent, adhering with the demand of the and the tonality of the question. So discuss the role of Indo-Australian Defence Partnership in securing the Indian Ocean region. So in the intro, what do you write? Which is the portion that you attack in the intro? The intro should attack the phrase Indian Ocean region. Indian Ocean region is a diverse region hosting a large population or billion plus population, and at the same time, not many of them are well to do countries. So they require a kind of hand holding where countries like India and Australia can rise up and be the net security provider. That can be your intro as well. Eventually, on the same lines, you can use the conclusion as well. Now, after that, basically, you talk about that how this defense partnership helps in not only security against the piracy in the region around Gulf of Aden, or in ensuring that the choke points they don't get militarized, or even in humanitarian and disaster relief operations across the region, interoperability against the Chinese hegemony and the Chinese aggression. All those factors first you describe, right? The importance of Indo-Australian partnership in the region, and then come to the measures. So in between, you also talk about that this relationship is already bearing fruits in the form of military exercises, in the form of partnership, 2+2 dialogue, and but then there are certain more challenges and measures which need to be taken, then finish the answer. Okay? Do tend to write these answers. Please do not ignore them as a kind of an exercise. Please don't have the goal, I will clear the prelims, I will be happy in life. If you really want to clear the civil services without answer writing, I can guarantee that regardless of how much you study, without answer writing practice, you will never make it through. But if your goal is, I will clear prelims, after that we will see what happens, then fair enough, ignorance is bliss. Now, coming to the third article, a ban, a split verdict, and a health concern. Now, this is an article dealing with mustard, part of GS paper 3. Now, this is something which is dealing with the aspect of mustard. Now, when it comes to mustard, right, it is the third largest edible oil consumed in India in terms of the consumption pattern. Right, amongst the, or when you talk about the world, we are amongst the largest consumers of mustard. Now, all of you would have seen in your region also that mustard is consumed. Mustard has got that kind of a pungent or a pungency associated. Now, that is partly given by what is referred to as the erucic acid. Erucic acid. Now, erucic acid content in mustard in India is slightly higher, superbly higher, around 45 to 50%. What is erucic acid? I will talk about it. Now, that is something which is a detriment to Western countries, because various studies have indicated that erucic acid or a higher amount of erucic acid, not only does it add to the pungency in terms of smell and taste, it makes it very strong, but at the same time, it can cause premature tissue death, then heart diseases, retarded growth, adversal changes to liver, kidney, skeletal damage, and so on. So Western countries, they have always been restrictive regarding the Indian mustard consumption. Now, in order to ensure that the mustard in our country also is more consumable, you have some of the additives which are mixed. Some other edible oils are mixed with mustard. But periodic studies and researches and investigations have also indicated that mustard is one of the most adulterated edible oil, or one of the most adulterated consumer product available in the market. Decades back, you had, due to the adulteration of mustard, you even had an issue of dropsy. So mustard and adulteration of mustard oil has been a long-standing concern. Now, in order to ensure that the mustard farmers, they don't suffer, they have enough amount of production, the Food Safety and FSSAI, basically the Food Safety and Standard Authority of India, FSSAI in 2021 basically came up with a directive. So that is where you had a ban, and that is where we will talk about a verdict. A ban, a split verdict, and a health. So a ban is by FSSAI, a verdict is by Supreme Court, and health concern is erucic acid. Now, FSSAI prohibited the manufacturing and sale of blended mustard oil in India effective from 8th June 2021. As per the directive, selling an edible oil mixed with another edible oil, the proportion of mixture should not be more than 20%. That if I have mustard, I am mixing some other edible oil, it should not be more than 20% of what I already have. Otherwise, there is no point of calling it mustard oil anymore. So that is where FSSAI found that lot of various different edible oils have that kind of a mixture. It was problematic. It still has that mixture. Many of us, we still consume that blended, that mixed mustard oil, which is unhealthy. Now, Supreme Court, in a parallel situation, recently, that is on 23rd June 2024, last year, basically ruled against the approval granted by the central government for the environmental release of India's indigenously developed, genetically modified mustard, that is HARA 11, DMH 11. Supreme Court argued, or the observation made by the Supreme Court was that not enough study has been done in order to understand the impact on human health when it comes to the genetically modified species. That was the observation made by the Supreme Court, due to which it banned the introduction of DMH 11. Why are we talking about DMH 11 all of a sudden? That is because in this DMH 11, the erucic acid content has been lowered, which is an achievement by the scientists, isn't it? But then banning this again basically ensures that whatever we have is a very high erucic acid content mustard, which needs to be blended in order to make it more consumable. And the blending provides impurities, which is a health concern. But this erucic acid that we have been talking about, what is this erucic acid? Erucic acid is a naturally occurring monosaturated omega 9 fatty acid. Now, just to give you an idea, in mustard that you have mustard oil and the mustard that you have in India, so there the erucic acid content is around 45% to 50%. You know what is the global standard for erucic acid content? Global standard is less than 5%. Countries like Canada, they have produced some amount of canola whereby the erucic acid content is around 2%. So in that scenario, mustard having 45 to 50% of erucic acid, that is simply something which is not very desirable in other countries as well. That is why it is being blended. Why? Because of the pungency, because of the health impact that we have discussed. Now, erucic acid is commonly found in rapeseed, mustard, and some other plants of the Brassicaceae family. Now, what is that family about? So, mustard, rapeseed. Then you also have, for example, cabbage, broccoli. All of those also come under this same family, right? So, basically, in these kind of vegetables, etc., you have the presence of erucic acid. But then, is erucic acid always damaging? The answer is no. Slight amount of erucic acid basically can be advantageous for the health as well. So you can have antibacterial activity, right? Anti-inflammatory activity, anti-cancer, then neuroprotective and carrier for drugs that you consume. So there are certain beneficial properties associated with erucic acid as well. So it is not always damaging, but at the same time, it is slightly beneficial. So what should be done going ahead into the future? So going ahead into the future, we have to ensure that there is not enough adulteration. Adulteration is not carried out. But at the same time, you need to create alternatives of the kind of mustard, maybe genetic modification, whatever the Supreme Court observation has been brought up. Now, where we have to have a greater acceptance of some of the genetically modified crops as well. That is also one of the barriers that we face. That is the large scale adoption. So we have to adapt to that. We have to go for a newer research and development in the agricultural sector to ensure that the mustard which is there is healthy, not adulterated in case of oil, and also when it comes to erucic acid, it is within the controlled amount so that the benefits are there, not the damages. Okay. Now, after this, an article which we are going to deal in short associated with the prelims aspect. So, no contempt if parliament or legislatures make laws. That is an observation made by Supreme Court. Now, there was an appeal or a kind of a PIL which was filed in the Supreme Court asking for contempt action and contempt proceeding against the Chhattisgarh government. Now, why was there this request of contempt proceeding against Chhattisgarh government? So basically, in order to fight left-wing extremists, governments are of Chhattisgarh, the government of Chhattisgarh, and some practices were even followed by Jharkhand and Odisha, but more prominently in Chhattisgarh, you had the arming of the local villagers against the Maoists. And you had the groups which were formed, that was the Salva Judum. Now, that was something which was legal, unconstitutional, and Supreme Court came out with a heavy-handed reply and a heavy-handed observation at that point of time that this Salva Judum has to be disbanded, has to be basically removed. Now, again, this was something which was done across. Now, Chhattisgarh, what it did, the Chhattisgarh government, it came up with a new law whereby it created the armed militias to fight against the Maoists or the left wing extremists. Now, the PIL has argued that look, Chhattisgarh government basically is doing the same thing. It is going against your earlier directive. So, it should be a contempt. You should punish the Chhattisgarh government. But the Supreme Court has argued that look, we had given an observation, we had given a ruling. Now, after that, Chhattisgarh government has gone ahead and made a new law altogether. Now, when it has made a new law, it is not a contempt of court. Whether that law is justified or not, for that you take a legal route. Whether it fits the basic principles and all, so then you take another different legal route. But just because a law has been passed, that does not come under the purview of contempt of court. So a law passed by the parliament or the state legislature does not fall under the category of contempt of court. Okay? Now, when we talk about contempt of court, now that is where in India it is driven by the Contempt of Courts Act of 1971. Now, this was done and this act was framed based on the recommendations of H.N. Sanyal Committee. Now, when we talk about the contempt of court in our country, you have two types of contempt which is divided, that is civil and criminal contempt, which is punishable by a fine or imprisonment of 6 months or sometimes both, unless and until the party who is committing that contempt issues or tenders an apology if required by the court. Otherwise, imprisonment, at the same time fine. Now, what is a civil contempt? A civil contempt, willful disobedience to any judgment, decree, direction, order, writ, or other processes of a court, or willful breach of an undertaking given by a court. That is civil. When we talk about criminal contempt, in the case of the criminal contempt, you have publication, whether by written or spoken medium, or by signs or any other means, whereby the aim is to scandalize or tends to scandalize or lowers or tends to lower the authority of the court, where you pedestrianize the court proceedings itself. Then, prejudices or interferes or tends to interfere with the due course of any judicial proceedings. There also contempt proceedings can be initiated. Interferes or tends to interfere with or obstructs or tends to obstruct with the administration of justice in any manner. In these three cases, criminal contempt is triggered. So you have civil contempt and you have criminal contempt. What is civil contempt? What is criminal contempt? Under which conditions are they triggered? That is relevant for your examination. Now, what are the constitutional provisions backing this? This is also relevant for the prelims. So, under Article 129, the Supreme Court, as a court of record, has the power to punish for its own contempt anyone who carries out the contempt of the Supreme Court. Article 142, Part 2 allows the Supreme Court to make orders ensuring attendance, document production, or punishment for contempt. It can basically make orders for that. And in the case of High Court, Article 215, right, provides High Courts as a courts of record with the authority to punish for contempt. High Courts can punish the lower courts for contempt as well. So this is the constitutional provision. What is a contempt? What is the Contempt Act? Then you have the HN Sanyal Committee and the aspect of constitutional provision. Okay? Punishable with imprisonment as well as a fine or either one of them. Now, motion of impeachment against Justice Verma likely during monsoon session of Parliament. The Parliamentary Affairs Minister has said that he is in consultation with various different political parties and the leaders of political parties to gain a consensus regarding the impeachment of Justice Yashwant Verma. For those of us who are uninitiated regarding the issue and who don't have the background of this issue, now Justice Yashwant Verma was the one who made news headlines when he was out of town and there was a fire outbreak in his residence. He was at that point of time the judge in the Delhi High Court. Now, at that point of time, when the fire broke out in his outhouse, unaccounted for bundles of cash were found. Now, immediately after that, the Chief Justice transferred him to the Allahabad High Court, creating a lot of uproar amongst the bar and the bench of the Allahabad High Court as well. Right? But at the same time, the Chief Justice nudged Justice Verma that please tender your resignation in order to ensure a moral high ground, tender your resignation. Now, Justice Verma has been declining that. He has not done and gone ahead with that. Now, after that, as per the article, now the parliamentary proceedings will take over, and now the parliament will bring about an impeachment motion against the judge and will try to get him removed. Now, impeachment of a judge is slightly complicated in our country. Till now, you never had a major impeachment process which has happened. Because understand, not only are the conditions so very stringent, but at the same time, in the final stages of, let's suppose, the impeachment motion, if the judge apologizes or resigns, thereby he can continue with his post-retirement services as well. So impeachment, in many of the cases it has happened that the required number of signatures to introduce the impeachment motion has been there. But then at the time of introduction of motion, those MPs have withdrawn their signatures. As recent as 2017 and 2016, this is one of the instances which have happened. So for your prelims, important to understand what is that process of impeachment. So the constitutional articles 124, part 4 and 5, 217 and 218 of the Constitution and the Judges Inquiry Act of 1968 require proved misbehavior or incapacity to be established through a process involving both parliamentary and a 3-member judicial committee. So what is the process of impeachment? So impeachment motion must be initiated either in the Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha and approved by the respective presiding officer. Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, whosoever is the presiding officer. Now, a 3-member committee, once the motion is introduced, a 3-member committee, judicial committee, is set up. Now, that is as per the requirement of the Judges Act. Now, the 3-member judicial committee will include a Supreme Court judge, a Chief Justice of a High Court, and an eminent jurist to look into the charges which have been framed against the judge. Now, this committee functions like a trial court to investigate and determine guilt. Right? Now, earlier also, you had a case of disproportionate assets. In the case of a judge, Justice Soumitra Sen. Now, there also you had large amount of cash, which was disproportionate to his income, which was found. The impeachment proceedings were initiated, but in the later stages, he simply resigned. Right? So the entire impeachment or the removal could not be carried out. So here, First, you need is a parliamentary approval. For successful impeachment, the motion requires either two-thirds majority of the present MPs voting in favor or an absolute majority in each house. Only after that, a judge can be impeached. Okay, so under which provisions are the judges impeached? Then after that, what is the process of impeachment? What is the parliamentary requirement? What is the trial court? Trial court consisting of three judges, that is a Supreme Court judge, Chief Justice of a High Court, and an eminent jury. Okay, this is something you should be aware of. Now, then something relevant for your prelims: sulfur cleaning device in coal plants is not necessary. Now, in India, we produce the energy that is generated. Most of that energy is actually the thermal power. So you have the thermal power plants. Now, even in thermal power plants, one of the most prominent or the predominant source of energy is basically coal. Now, coal power plants are very, very polluting. They release sulfur as well. They have been known to pollute the atmosphere. So there had been a directive which was given that install flue gas desulfurization units. Flue gas desulfurization unit. Now, what is flue gas, by the way? Flue gas is the name or a moniker given to waste gas, the waste output. Think about it. For those of us who don't know what is that flue gas and how the energy is produced, very simple. In the coal power plants, thermal power plants, coal which is brought from the mines, it is and washed after that. Now that coal is first of all pulverized, broken into a 2 millimeter thickness particle. Now, for that, in order to do that, you have a large pulverizer drum where you have a large cylindrical drum consisting of iron balls which are there, and they rotate at a very high RPM, due to which anything which is present in between that gets crushed. So the coal gets crushed. The coal is crushed to increase its surface area to improve the thermal efficiency when it is burnt, when it undergoes combustion. Now that coal which is powdered now, that coal is moved into the boiler. There the coal is ignited. Now the heat which is produced, that is used to convert the water into steam. That steam then runs basically the turbine. The turbine is coupled with a generator, so as the turbine wheel spins, the generator also spins and electricity is then generated. But when you have burnt that coal, that would have produced a lot of smoke. It has produced heat which has generated electricity, but it would also have produced a lot of smoke. Now that smoke is something which comes out as a waste gas, not to be utilized again. It includes various different heavy metals as well, various different chemical compounds, nitrates, sulfides, etc., carbon monoxide, and so on. Now, that is a waste gas. That is known as flue gas. Now, in the case of power plants, you have the FHD units which are installed at the output around the flue gas, so that the sulfur is removed from the flue gas. You don't have the waste sulfur. So that is FHD units. Now, earlier there was a directive which was given that the power plants need to install the FHD units in order to combat the air pollution which is happening in India. But now the ministry has, owing to the advice by the various different scientific bodies and committees and the study which has been done, the ministry has lowered that requirement. That requirement is now only in the case of the million plus cities, right? Million plus cities. So when you have power plants in the region of million plus cities, they will be put under category A. Now thereafter, only these plants need to install FHD unit. Why? Why has the ministry come out with this directive? There are certain reasons for that. One of the reason is that when it comes to Indian coal has got slightly low calorific value, but Indian coal is also famous for low sulfur content. Indian coal is famous for low sulfur, high ash content. So when you have low sulfur content and a high ash content, What is the need for desulfurization in that case? Also, more surprisingly, what was found out by the scientific advisors was the amount of sulfur contamination in the air around the power plants and around the other regions of the cities. They did not make much of a difference. That means the amount of sulfur which is added from the thermal power plants is not very high. Sulfur addition is happening through other sources and other industries. So if that is the case, you don't need these FSD units. Now, yes, there was a kind of a delay since the directive was issued. After that, you had the COVID pandemic, and you have limited suppliers of FSD units across the globe. Few of the suppliers like Mitsubishi, etc., they are the ones. So there is a high cost involved, high turnaround time involved, and the power generation will be much more costlier once you start installing these FSD units. So basically, for your prelims, just to get you into the loop and to help you understand what is this FSD unit, this is what a kind of an FSD unit looks like. So here what tends to happen is that SO2, sulfur induced flue gas, sulfur enriched flue gas, that is passed through. Now as it is passed through, now there is a kind of a wet scrub which is done. Now in this, many of the times you have water which is sprayed, in many of the times lime is sprayed. Now that is when the sulfur combines, right, with the slurry, and that is when it forms a byproduct like gypsum. That is something which is extracted from the base and used for other purposes. And the gas eventually, after passing through multiple such filtration scrubbers, so to say, that is when the gas which is released, the flue gas which is released, that is free of sulfur load. So that is a kind of a basic understanding of what an FSD. Okay. Now, after that, coming to the next article. Now, this article is bacteria found at Rajgir hot spring lake shows antimicrobial activity. So a study has been carried out in the region of the hot spring lake that you have in Rajgir. In many of the parts of the country, particularly in the region of Himalayas, you would have found the hot springs. That is where you have a small lake and the water is at a higher temperature, 45-50 degrees Celsius. People oftentimes take a dip and take a bath in those lakes and ponds. And it is said that it cures certain diseases. That is where the belief comes in. That is where people consider these lakes and water bodies to be divine. In many parts of the region of Himachal, you will find a kind of a holy reverence provided to these water bodies. Now, the study has indicated that in these water bodies across the globe, due to the high temperature, you have the presence of microbes which are known as thermophiles. Thermophiles. Now, these thermophiles basically, they like higher temperature. They are happy with higher temperature. So, in that higher temperature, in order to survive, in order to remove any of the untoward intrusions, etc., they tend to secrete certain chemicals, and those chemicals have antimicrobial properties. This is one of the reasons why, when, let's suppose, someone suffering from a simple disease or an infection, when they take a bath in these ponds, they tend to heal. They get healed slightly. So that is what the research study is about. But at the same time, it has got a lot of implications. It has got implications in terms of antimicrobial resistance, development of newer drugs in pharmaceutical industry, and at the same time, a new era of exploration or a new area of exploration regarding these kind of thermophile bacterium that has come in front, whereby now you have a series of various bacterium which can be used in labs in order to produce the required drugs and pharmaceuticals. So here for your prelims, what you need to know. A question can be framed that whether hot springs are or having temperature more than 45-50 degrees Celsius, will they have microbial presence or not? So that is where you have to be aware of that. Okay. So, and what is thermophilic bacteria? What is the property? That is about prelims. Now, then the last article. For the first time in 100 years, rare wild orchid seen in UK. Now you have a wild orchid, that is new lady slipper orchid, which has been seen in UK after 100 years, right? And the position and the location is not disclosed because In 1900s, early 1900s, collection of this orchid would be so prominent and so prized possession that people plucked almost all of them. So that is why the conservationists, they are keeping it and guarding it a secret. For us, for the exam, what is this lady's slipper orchid? So it is the subfamily of the five genera of orchids, now found throughout Eurasia and the Americas. Now, lady's slipper orchids are usually terrestrial, even though some of them are epiphytic or can be found growing in the rocks as well. So that is about the orchid. Okay. Yes, Asha, those chemicals will survive at very high temperature. Now, when we talk about lady slipper orchids, some of them are even critically endangered. Some of them range under least concern as well. So, you have wide variety of ladies orchids which are present. Okay. So, with that, we come to the end of the discussion for the day. In today's discussion, we started with energy security, which is very important for your exam, India Australia defense partnership, and moved on to the topics of polity, the portion of science and tech, and so on. If you have liked the content and if it has added value, then please do not forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button and put that in the comment section. What I would also suggest you, do try to write your answer on your own. At least frame the pointers and the introduction so that you can have a structure. After the session in the afternoon, take a look at the quiz, which has been the multiple choice question, which you will find on the Telegram channel. And that is where you can understand how much you have assessed and how much have you been able to retain from this analysis. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.